All right, good morning. We are excited to welcome you to this morning's webinar. This is the second in our series that's going through our guide chapter by chapter. And today we're going to focus on chapter 2, which is preparing the organization. We'd love to get started with introductions. If folks want to introduce themselves in the chat, we'd love if you wanted to share your name, your role, where you're joining from. We'd love to just get the chat going this morning. My name is Adrienne Girard, and I'm the director of the Training and Technical Assistance team for First Steps Together. And this webinar series is for anyone who's looking to launch or further develop or enhance their peer-led home visiting or clinical services for families impacted by parental substance use. And each month we highlight a different chapter of the guide, exploring the concepts, offering examples from practice, and tools to use to both support the staff working in the field and the families we're serving. Attendees are welcome to join individual webinars of interest or the series as the whole, and we're very thankful to see you here this morning. Right now in the chat, we're going to put a link so you can download a copy of the guide if you'd like to follow along. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about First Steps Together, do some quick housekeeping and our resources, and I'm looking forward to hand it over to our presenters this morning. So First Steps Together is a home visiting program dedicated to serving and empowering families on their parenting and recovery journey. We have sites across Massachusetts that serve parents, expectant parents who have been affected by substance use. We offer voluntary and free services in the home, community, or virtually, delivered by a peer support specialist who's a parent in recovery or a mental health counselor with specialized training. And we also offer groups and care coordination. First Steps Together is open to any person 18 years of age or older who has used opioids, stimulants, alcohol, cannabis, or other substances in the past or present, and who is pregnant or expecting a child or has at least one child age 5 years or younger. On our website, www.firststepstogetherma.org, you can find information on our sites, including contact information. So before we begin, I just wanted to mention that this meeting will be recorded and available publicly. We'll send it out, a link to the recording and the slides out after. Please mute when you're not speaking and feel free to unmute for questions and discussion. And we'd love for people to share in the chat throughout. We will have an opportunity for question and answer at the end. And we'd like to just share a couple of reminders. First is that we know that some of these topics may bring up feelings or experiences, and we just want to make sure that you care for yourself. And if you need to take a break, please do so. The information that we share is what we have found today and what we know so far. We welcome conversations about this topic and are happy to hear others' experiences in the field. And we recognize that accepted language and best practices are ever evolving. And as presenters, we aim to create a brave space for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we expect that others are willing to engage in this way. So today we're going to cover an overview of chapter 2, which is preparing the organization, and hear from a panel of experts of what this really looks like in practice. And again, we're going to have opportunity for question and answer at the end. These are the presenters and panelists that I am so thankful are here and excited to learn with and from. Erica Napolitan, who's the Assistant Director of First Steps Together Training and Technical Assistance Team, and she's going to provide the overview of Chapter 2 and facilitate our panel. And our amazing panel of experts, we have Deborah Berkovitz, who's the First Steps Together Director. She's from the Bureau of Family Health and Nutrition at the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Don DeStefano, who's the President and CEO of Square One. Rita McKinnon, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Bay State Community Services, and Cindy Horgan, who's the Director of Family Support Services at Cape Cod Children's Place. So before I hand it over to Erica, I just wanted to take a second to review the guide and to give some context for our training today. When we set off to create this resource a few years ago, we envisioned that it would be an implementation manual for our First Steps Together site, which started as a pilot program. And this would support and guide our sites running the program. Now that guide has grown into a 300 plus page labor of love, and it has become a resource for anyone who's embarking or expanding their work in peer-led programs that serve families impacted by parental substance use. It's a compilation of theory, practice, process, and experiences of so many who are doing this rewarding and at times exhausting and difficult work every day. We received so much input from content experts across the field, especially from our sites, and we paid special attention to the voices of those with lived expertise and those who represent often marginalized populations within the recovery community. You'll see it's divided into 3 sections: building the foundation in yellow, serving families in blue, and the My Family Portfolio and Provider Guide in purple, which are also available as standalone books. All right, well, now I am excited to hand it over to Erica to dive a little bit more into chapter 2.
Thank you, Adrienne. So this brings us to our focus for today, which is the Building the Foundation, chapter 1.2, Preparing the Organization. As you can see here, we have the cover section for Building the Foundation, which can be found on page 15. And if you're following along with us, this is the cover page for chapter 1.2, Preparing the Organization, which you can find on page 45. So today we'll be doing a very brief overview of chapter 2. This section includes recovery-oriented systems and organizations, create a leadership team, conduct an agency assessment, moving from assessment to action, and embedding organizational culture into policy and practice. Today I'll be reviewing the 2 circled sections, and then we'll have the opportunity to hear from our panel of leaders implementing these concepts into their agencies. So each chapter starts off with a quote, and the quote for this one is, "When there isn't true buy-in from leadership, the initiative will tank. It is critical to have a champion that drives the work and helps to get agency buy-in. It's really important to have people that understand and believe in the work and want to see it through in an authentic way." And this came from one of our program supervisors. So what this is really saying, and what you're going to see today, is that what it really takes to do this work is to have that buy-in and belief from the agency from the start. And it really sets and builds the foundation for the work that we do in the families that we serve. Recovery-oriented systems and organizations. We really do understand and promote a recovery-oriented culture at all levels, from direct service and staff supervision to community partnerships and organizational leadership. This dedication is really seen throughout our culture, our values, our policies, and our procedures, and it comes through in everything that we do. So what does it mean to be recovery-oriented? Recovery is a strength and a way of relating to the world that impacts every aspect of someone's identity. So when we are recovery oriented, we literally mean turning everything towards supporting those in recovery and respecting their self-determination. Recovery oriented organizations really understand that recovery is possible and it's sustainable when people have the right support. And really doing this requires a lot of thought and planning and commitment from all levels of organization. So when we think about recovery-oriented systems of care, these are some of the characteristics that were identified by SAMHSA as being important. It really emerges from hope, knowing that, as I said before, with the right supports, recovery is possible and sustainable. It is person-driven, and it embraces everyone's chosen path of recovery. It really is holistic, and the work is supported by peers and allies. It's culturally informed and responsive, honoring staff and the participants' backgrounds. It's supported through relationships and social networks, and it emphasizes the strengths of individuals, families, and their communities. It supports the community by addressing trauma, and its foundation is based on respect. And I think we're going to pop a link to this article from SAMHSA in the chat so you can read more about recovery-oriented systems of care. But like, why is this really important, that we have agency buy-in and an agency that is really recovery oriented and embracing it? So it matters because when an agency embraces recovery oriented practices, it has a greater impact on the families through the parallel process. So if at the agency level, they truly believe that recovery is possible, they see the value in people, and they create spaces where people can take care of their wellness and themselves and have their needs met through their job, then that staff is then able to practice these skills from themselves and take them to the families that they serve. And when staff feel supported in a genuine, real way, then they are able to support parents and families in a genuine and real way. And this benefits the family because then parents are able to model that same type of support and care for their children. And this is what really brings us to creating stronger family relationships, stronger communities, and working towards breaking that generational cycle of addiction. It really does come back to having an agency and a foundation that believes in what we do from the top down and from the bottom up. And it really is this modeling that happens when we know that our director values us and sees our recovery as being important and the work that we do as being important, and our supervisor feels that way, then staff, whether it be peers or clinicians or family support providers, also feel that way, and they can bring that to families. And when a family feels held, we know that they can feel more secure and safe and move towards healing and wellness. So to summarize, recovery-oriented best practice really involves taking a strength-based approach in all that you do. It's non-judgmental, it's non-stigmatizing, and really does look at the strengths of each person that's working within the agency and each family that they're serving. Practicing a person-centered care that supports all paths of recovery and harm reduction. Being trauma-informed and healing-centered with both staff supports and the family services that we're providing. Taking a holistic approach to wellness and remembering the parallel process in everything we do, modeling from the top down and valuing self-care across all levels. So I know that I'm skipping over some more of the action-based sections of this chapter, like the creating a leadership team and conducting an agency assessment and moving from assessment to action. But in the interest of time and really giving our panelists the opportunity to dig into what that looks like in practice, I'm going to jump right to embedding organizational culture into policy and practice. So really, by embedding shared values into the policies and practices, agencies can reinforce their commitment to recovery-oriented culture. When recovery-oriented policies are built into the program's foundation, they provide the team and program leadership with the necessary structure, tools, and environment to carry out their individual roles. This really creates an environment where everyone operates within the same framework. It creates a common language and understanding of priority of values, and it really just benefits everyone. So some of the potential areas for policy and practice are listed on this slide, and you can read through, but I just wanted to highlight a few of them. So thinking about hiring staff from diverse backgrounds. This may include people who need a little extra support around their queries, or folks with minimal work history who might not have done office work or service work that come from very diverse and different backgrounds than what we would typically see. Thinking about staff wellness and recovery and self-care. An agency can really help retain staff by developing policies that allow employees and staff to take the time and space that they need to tend to their own wellness and recovery. This may be a little different than what we're usually accustomed to with work. Taking time for self-care is so important in this type of work when we're serving families impacted by substance use. It's hard. We're holding a lot. We're caring a lot for these families. We're rallying behind them. And it's important that we're taking care of ourselves. And it's important that agencies recognize this and allow staff to take care of themselves as much as needed while still doing their job. Implementing policy that supports staff wellness can really reduce stress and minimize secondary trauma and help prevent burnout. And we have some of these other things that are important, like supervision and data collection. When we think about crisis response, responding to families in crisis is often part of the work that we do. being prepared for like really difficult and emergent situations can alleviate some of the stress and trauma for both parents and their providers. Thinking about supervisor capacity and caseload, home visiting safety, child safety concerns, and culturally and linguistically appropriate services are also important areas for policy and practice. So we'll have a little share in the chat. What are some recovery-oriented policies or practices in your agency? And what do you see as the benefit of these policies and procedures to staff? Meeting clients where they're at. Yes. Encouraged to take self-care time each day. See, that's great. That's really important to be able to take that time. Supervision and taking time for our own mental health. Yes. Clinical supervision. Also, yes, it really comes down to like that supervision and who we get to take these hard things to. Harm reduction and a strength-based approach. Absolutely. Reflective supervision, which is so important in the work that we do. These are great. Thank you, guys. And do we see any benefits from this? Hold on. Oh, here we go. I appreciate having the flexibility within my role to work remote some days. That is great. It's nice to be able to like not have to drive around and stay home and get your work done. Allowing the FRSS to have self-care, supervision, attend their pathway meeting. Yes, these are all good. Being able to provide clients with flexibility, being available for staff and group supervision, mitigating barriers to accessing professional development and supporting boundaries that are protective of all involved. Yes, Billy, that is great. Thank you. From the top down, everyone checks in when something difficult happens and puts the well-being of employees first. Shannon, that is exactly what we're talking about here, really having the support from the agency at all levels. Yeah, Stacia, like meeting you where you're at, giving you room to support and find the way to keep up with what you need to do, and really exactly like what we would do for participants, right? Is meeting staff where they're at as well and providing the support that they need. An open door policy, that's really important to be able to go to leadership when you need to. And all the tools needed to do our work to the best of our ability. Thank you, guys. You've really identified some really important things. No big I's or little U's. I like that. That's great, Wanda. Always coming through with these great little sayings to hold on to. Oh, excellent. All right. Thank you guys for sharing all these things. These are really identified important things and policies and practices that we need to do this work and take care of ourselves while we're taking care of others. And I think now we're going to be able to move over to our panel. So I am very excited to introduce our panel today. We have Cindy Horgan, who is the Director of Family Support Services at Cape Cod Children's Place. Cape Cod's Children's Place is a nonprofit resource, referral, and education center committed to providing high-quality care, support, and community engagement for families with children on the Cape and the islands. It is at the center of building a true community of caring to nurture, support, and empower local families. We have Rita McKinnon, who is from Bay State Community Services Chief Operating Officer, serving the greater South Shore area. Bay State's mission is to foster individual, family, and community empowerment through a culturally competent continuum of social, behavioral health, substance use recovery, prevention, and rehabilitative justice programs. Rita is responsible for the oversight of human resources, administrative operations for the agency, rehabilitative justice programs, and compliance. We have Don Forbes DeStefano, who currently works as Square One as the organization's president and CEO. With an annual budget of $10 million, the agency focuses on serving at-risk, low-income children and families with early education, childcare, home visiting, parent education, and support groups. Square One supports children and the adults in their lives whose well-being directly impacts their own health and wellness. No matter who arrives at the table of need, they stand ready to serve. And we have Deborah Berkovitz, who is the perinatal substance use coordinator for the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. She's the founder and director of First Steps Together, and she has been instrumental in the development of many state initiatives, including the Perinatal Recovery Coach Workforce, Perinatal Substance Use Community Collaboratives, and the implementation of the Plan of Safe Care federal requirement. She has conducted trainings nationally on family recovery, collaborative practice, and perinatal peer staff. She has worked in the field of substance use prevention, treatment, and recovery for more than 30 years and is a passionate believer from both personal and professional experience in the power of recovery to transform lives and families. So I am really excited to turn it over to our panel today, and we are going to be starting with Cindy, who is going to talk a little bit about embedding culture into policy and practice.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you everybody for the amazing work that you do. I always feel honored and privileged to be in this shared space. So Cape Cod Children's Place, we're a 30-year organization. We're not as big as Square One, but we look alike in many ways. What I will say is we started as a grassroots organization, which is really important to understand, supporting the law in Outer Cape. And it started as an early education center. And I joined the organization in 2004, and we really began our family support part of the work and started with parent education, really a great deal of it, and home visiting and those things there. From the very beginning, we've always been a strength-based organization. And I think probably one of those big recognitions that I always have with this organization is we didn't grow by looking at grant opportunities. That looks like a good thing to do. We grew our organization by understanding the needs of our community. So we have always been an organization that responded to the needs within our community. So when I started to be invited into many of the shelters on the Cape to be working there directly with our families impacted, and whether it was substance use disorder or whether it was domestic violence or however those families came to that place, it's in that work. And I consider myself really a fortunate person to share this journey with Christina Russell, who really heads up our First Steps team, and really started to sit and be present and listen to her experience in her journey. And it took me about 30 seconds that I'm on this train and I'm seeing this. And so we were recognizing that there was a way to do this work, engage families impacted by substance use, and being able to support them from a strength-based lens. And I think that that's an important part when we talk about embedding organizational culture. Everything was coming from that lens of strength-based. And so Christina joined us, and we were just figuring it out along the way. We didn't have the funding, but we knew we had the need. So we kept finding little pockets of money here and there. And one of the very first things that we started to do as an organization is make sure that there was a big understanding throughout the entire organization of what it meant to be trauma informed, to look at families as not why are they doing that, but what happened to them and how do we support them? And so being trauma informed was a critical part of onboarding into this. And so we really started our biggest piece of this work with the families, honestly, the grandparents that were raising grandchildren that were impacted here. And one of the ways that we really impacted policy is we were providing childcare when we provided those programs. And Parenting on the Other Side was the name of the program, but it didn't come without a learning lesson, because basically we called it Parenting in Recovery, and we were shocked that nobody wanted to come. And then when we called it Parenting It on the Other Side, we really shifted our lens to understand how important language is. But one of the things that was really critical, even at I wouldn't call it the basic level, but an intricate part of it, was all of those people that came that signed up to provide the child care so we could engage the parents and the caregivers. We needed them to be trauma informed. So we knew that this whole family came in and we were able to wrap them up in this philosophy, that we knew that that child that really had quite a journey already was going to always feel safe in this space. And when they felt safe, their parent or caregiver did. And so that's how critical it was that that was the kind of language. We have absolutely learned as we've gone on, and we've made a lot of missteps, and some of it was in language, and that we had to really shift and look at our forms and our intake forms, but we had to make this universal language. And some of the ways that it started to show itself is when we had Narcan training coming in our community members and what that looked like and things like that. When you came into our community bathroom, there was tons of Narcan for any parent. So anybody that came into this building had access to these things. We had lice kits. We had everything you can imagine sitting right in the forefront so that these families knew that there were no barriers to how we were going to help them be successful. We learned quickly as we grew that our space wasn't large enough and our territory expanded. So we now cover the Cape and the islands. So we created a satellite office. And as a director, that was probably my biggest challenge of, I felt like I had all these, I hate to say this, but I felt like, what is it, the sister wives, and I had all these wives that I had to kind of make sure they were getting what they needed out there. And again, I'm forever grateful for Christina Russell and just how amazing she is in leading that team. In doing that, it was really important that from an organization place, everybody kind of knew about each other. And I would say that that was the place that we continue to have to really grow in our policies, because it gets real easy to kind of sometimes be in silos even within the organization. And so that's a place that our policies are continuing to evolve. And we now have new leadership, and I think she's doing a great job of doing that piece there. I'll tell you, probably the biggest challenge in our policies was around the quarries, because we began as an early education center. So we are under a different umbrella. And I can't tell, they've lost my phone number. They don't want to talk to me anymore because I continually call to say, how can I get this changed? And they tell me that it's impossible because if we serve a child, we have to be under this umbrella. And so that's a real challenge for us, but working really hard over the years of supporting, onboarding really high quality staff for our First Steps team, that sometimes we had to navigate those barriers of how do we bring them on board and do it in a way that is both respectful and safe and all of that, so that their story is what brings us to a new level of height, but it doesn't become our barrier. I can tell you that when we started to really pay attention, some of the things that had to shift, and it really was about, we follow a school schedule. My favorite song on the whole radio is No School, All School when it snows out. And so the First Steps team was like, we've got to go. It's snowing out. Everybody stays home and plays in the snow. And so having to really shift our First Steps team to say, this is how this has got to work universally. And Christina sometimes, I think, struggled with me, but I think she enjoys a good sled ride. I really do. And one of the things that I would say is we really had to work at how we were making sure this big umbrella was universal. And so one of the benefits, because teachers, early educators don't make a lot of money, nobody in this field does. So we made sure that the same benefit of having assistance with early education for your own child was across the board. So now all of a sudden we had a lot of staff with school age children. Now we were able to really support them with school, after school programs and summer camps, so that became part of their benefits as well, that we were able to make that universal. One of the other things in our policies, which for me, I felt very strongly about, as well as Christina really advocated on, is really helping the First Steps team to have really healthy boundaries. And that was a step towards their practice of self-care. And so they all had, which wasn't part of everybody else in the organization, but their work cell phones, and really teaching, like, when you're done your day, we're not 911, and we can't function as 24/7. We have to function as a strength-based, building families from the inside out. And so these were practices that we had to come over again and again and really be insistent with this really incredible team of First Steps leaders as they engaged families and really modeled about boundary setting and how to do that in ways that was really healthy for them. I had the privilege, our team, when it was time for home visiting, and all of us on this call had an opportunity during COVID to really, really think outside this box. And so there were some practices that became universal where some had to be in the building, but then there were those working from home, and it got a little kind of muddy there for a little bit. So the new policy was anyone within the organization had to have approval from me in order to work at home. So we looked at each case individually. So it wasn't a blanket model, but we looked at each case individually to how do you support that and support work from home when that would come up occasionally. I would tell you that practicing self-care was another thing that we started to recognize. And again, I credit Christina with this input, was the First Steps team was full-time with a 35-hour week because we knew that this is messy work. And messy work doesn't mean bad work. It means that there's a lot of stuff. And that was another way that we could really support the wellness of this team. And it's been, for the most part, there's only a few people that in the organization that work over that, but the bulk of people have stayed at that area because this is about human beings, and it takes a lot for us to be able to provide for them. But I would say that probably the most impactful way of looking at this is that we have worked really hard. And again, we're always under construction is what I would say, but making sure our language is reflective of strength-based work, and to the point of correcting people in the community. When we hear substance abuse, all of us get all bejiggled and we carry on and get ourselves out of sorts. And so how do we respond to that? And, making that common language within the organization. So as we have grown, and again, I feel privileged that I get to be on this train. I really do. And this First Steps team at Cape Cod Children's Place, they take my breath away. And as we grow, we've learned a lot over these years, and we continue. So I think I've hit my 10-minute moment. So thank you for that minute.
Thank you, Cindy, so much for that just beautiful description of how you're implementing these policies and this program into your work. I think you hit on so many incredible points that are so valuable. Thank you for what you do. All right, and with that, I'm going to pass it over to Rita, who is also going to talk about embedding organizational culture into policy and practice.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm so appreciative to have the opportunity to speak with you all today. Erica, thank you for the introduction. Cindy, thank you for your thoughts. I think I'll echo much of what you shared. I'm Rita McKinnon, the Chief Operating Officer at Bay State. I've been with Bay State for a little over 18 years and have had the opportunity and really the privilege to work with and be involved with so many of our different programs and services. I'm a clinician by training in LMHC, and part of what attracted me to Bay State was the work that they were doing with substance use disorders, especially back in the early 2000s when substance use treatment was not as supported as it really is today. Bay State was founded in the mid-90s. It was a merger of 5 local nonprofits. Our founding agencies were grassroots in every meaning of the word, community-based outreach, going into people's homes. What do you need? How can we get it for you? Our founders were individuals and families in recovery. So substance use work is core to who we are, and we've never lost sight of that. I think for me, that's really highlighted by our 21 peer support programs and well over 60 staff who use their lived experience every single day to make a difference. Today, we have 80 different types of programs and services. We have 19 locations. We offer traditional outpatient counseling, psychiatry, court-mandated programs, justice-involved programs. We work many of our kiddo programs, in-home family therapy, IHT, care coordination, therapeutic mentoring. We have 4 residential programs. So as Cindy was referencing the barriers with some of the background check stuff, we live and breathe that every day in our residentials and know how challenging that can be from a CORI perspective. And then for our peer services, we're really proud. We have 2 peer recovery support centers. We offer recovery coaching, of course, our First Steps Together contracts, as well as our statewide recovery education collaborative in Mass Young People in Recovery. Early in my career, I was a full-time fee-for-service clinician. And I still vividly remember doing an intake with a young woman who came in, very emotional, very distressed. And as we're going through her intake, she's telling me a little bit about what brought her in. And she lets me know that her therapist told her that she needed to go to Bay State to get sober. Now, I was newish to the field at that time, but that kind of struck me as odd. So, I probed a little bit, talked a little bit more, and ultimately it comes out that she's been in counseling for many years for depression, but has continued to struggle with opiate use despite being on a methadone clinic. She had a son who I think at that time was probably 9 or 10. And basically her therapist told her that if she didn't cut cold turkey, get sober, she was going to lose her kid. And she certainly was not going to be able to continue working on her mental health until she got her substance use under control. Now, as you can imagine, I was equal parts shocked and horrified, definitely a little confused, and really trying to understand why we were separating and kind of parceling off what this woman needed. What I didn't appreciate then, that I certainly appreciate now, all these years into my career, was that my reaction, my confusion, was directly correlated to the culture of the agency that I worked for. We did not subscribe to the prevailing belief at that time that you could somehow separate someone's mental health from their substance use, or that we as providers, practitioners, could define what someone's sobriety looked like. That had been ingrained in me since I was a little itty bitty baby clinician. You treat the whole person, you meet them where they're at, you think outside the box. So as more and more peer services have come online over the years, as an agency, we really wanted to think about what does that mean for us and how are we supporting these staff that we're hiring. The last thing we want to do is hire people with lived or living experience just for the sake of doing it, to make ourselves feel good, like we're doing something. And then we put them over there in those programs and separate them out. Ideologically, how is that not further replicating the stigma of addiction, right? And we're creating this culture of us and them. So as an agency, again, you really have to think about how do we unify? How do we unite? I think for us, the first key to our integration of peer support services into our culture is integration. One of the things that we are really proud of, and we've made a really conscious effort, is to ensure that every single program in Bay State employs individuals with lived or living experience. Now, they may be using that experience as part of their primary role. They could be a recovery coach, right? And they're using that firsthand experience, or that could be part of who they are and they work in our business office. It doesn't matter. That is part of who we are. Every single member of our senior management team and many, many of our board members have also been impacted by the substance use disorder, and in particular, the opiate epidemic. Again, this has been very intentional. Our staff needs to see a united front, acceptance and excitement about what we're doing, and understand that we all value it personally. And that's why it's so important to us. I think another key component really is communication and education, right? We want to, and we ensure that everyone at Bay State is aware of the programs and the services that we offer, that they understand new contracts that we're going for, new grants that we're getting. We talk about the strategy. What's the value of this? How does this align with our mission and our vision and our other programs? Ultimately, how does this fit into our puzzle? Because on paper, sometimes I think our agency looks a little scattered, right? We have children's programs, we have correctional programs, we have all of these different programs, but there is actually a golden thread that links all of them. And what is that? We have monthly meetings with our program directors. There's actually one going on currently as we speak, and talk about what's going on with the agency, what programs are need support, what programs are looking for referrals, how do we overlap, how do we support each other? And so when we think about our peer services in particular, and First Steps is a great example of this, it's an obvious no-brainer. I don't think there's a single program at Bay State that we operate that isn't able to see the obvious value add to offering support to parents in recovery, especially when there's young kids involved. And yet, as I think we've touched on a little bit, we don't want to assume that, right? That makes sense to me, but that may not make sense to everyone. So we talk about it. We're really transparent about that. One of the other things we did was spend a lot of time with our clinical staff, helping them to better understand the role of peer support services and how they support, not supplant, the clinical work that's being done and vice versa. As a clinician, how am I supporting this recovery coach, this therapeutic mentor, whatever it may be? Again, there is no us and them. There really is only us. We are all part of the same team. We all play an important role. But we also have to recognize that we each have a specific role in a specific lane that we need to stay in. And how do we coexist within that? How do we communicate? What do we communicate? I think from a policy perspective, that is something that we've thought a lot about and continues to be evolutionary. What information gets shared? What's bidirectional? What's not? And why? And being really thoughtful and intentional about that. And then I think the last component that I really want to kind of touch on is human resources. As part of my role here, as Erica shared, I oversee human resources. And this has really been central, in my opinion, to the success of our peer programs. Let's be honest, nothing strikes fear in the heart of any member of HR quite like a Corey Sawyer or Adam Walsh coming back with something on it, right? It's panic. It's, oh my goodness, what are we going to do with this? What's the risk? What's our tolerance? What do we do with this, right? And so that meant that there were and there are some very frank and transparent ongoing conversations that we have with human resources about hiring individuals with lived experience. And is there an increased likelihood of having something pop up on a background check if someone's living with the experiences that so many of our peer support folks have come with? Having a criminal record or some other mark on someone's background check is often, I think, just another unintended consequences of someone's substance use. It's not personal. It's usually not very representative of who they are and who they want to be, right? Instead, it's representative of the desperation, the darkness that was going on during their addiction. But again, we really want to think about who they are today and how can we support them. I think for us, again, philosophically, if we as an organization are trying to fight stigma and we're trying to preach that everyone deserves a second chance, then that parallel process has to come in place here, right? We need to model for the community and to our clients that we really support people. We fight the stigma when we employ and hire people who are looking for that second chance. And guess what? Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's complicated. Sometimes it makes us really, really uncomfortable, but that's okay. We lean into it. We come together. We talk about it. We talk about it some more. Usually we schedule another meeting to talk about it again, but ultimately we figure it out and we move forward from there. Again, from a policy perspective, what this meant, though, is we really have to think about policies and protocols. For example, who's a need-to-know person when it comes to background checks, right? Who really needs to know the details of that? Again, kind of to what Cindy was talking about with our residential programs, we don't have a lot of input on discretionary hires, and that's what we were used to. But with so many of our peer programs, we do have that discretionary input. So this has also been a shift for us in thinking about who ultimately is making that decision. We talk a lot about how do we talk to our prospective candidates about their backgrounds if something comes through? How do we ask those tough decisions? But more importantly, how do we sit with their answers? How do we sit with their truth? And how do we move forward with what that means, especially if the decision is to hire? And again, that's something that clinically I can process through in my head, but that's something that I need to make sure that every single member of the team is on board with, and not just on board saying, yeah, okay, we're good with that, but like, we're really good with that. And we are embracing this and we're leaning into it together. I think from an HR perspective, equally important, and certainly what Erica was touching on, is once someone's hired, how do we support them? How do we help them to feel safe in their role with us and help them to feel safe asking for help? If someone's struggling and needs to go to a midday meeting or check in with their sponsor, they should do that, no questions asked. However, just because that makes sense to me and that seems obvious, that doesn't mean that that's actually obvious to everyone. So we need to say that out loud. We need to talk about that at orientation. We need to talk about that through onboarding. We need to make sure that all of the program directors recognize that that is our party line here and that everyone's on board with that. So I could go on and on and on, trying to be mindful of time, but I really think in summary for us, so success is really collective across the agency. It cannot be limited or siloed into single programs. And the more that an agency can embrace the model and really invest the time in developing the process, being okay with the discomfort that comes along with that sometimes, the better the outcome. Thank you all so much for what you do. Thank you for letting me be a part of this really important conversation. I so appreciate your time.
Rita, thank you so much for all of that. There's so many times where I wanted to like jump out of my seat and like kind of cheer you on, but I appreciate, you know, I've worked with Bay State for 5 years now, and just you guys, you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk as well. And that was clear in everything that you brought to the table today. So thank you so much. For all of that. And we're going to pass it over to Dawn DeStefano from Square One now, and she's going to talk a little bit about the same kind of how we support staff through policy and practice, but also flexibility and accountability in doing this work.
Thank you so much, Erica, and thank you to Cindy and Rita. It's never easy to go after two people that really fill in all those gaps. So I hope to add some additional value, but at the risk of sounding ridiculous, I would say ditto to everything you said. I have the great pleasure of spending most of my awake hours celebrating the successes and the opportunities here at Square One. Believe it or not, we are quite old. We're big and we're old. We started our work 140 years ago in 1883. Yes, 1883. And have had continuous service. So there hasn't been any break in the action for 140 years. So as a woman-owned business, I think that's pretty remarkable. I know we're a diverse group here, but that's pretty amazing. We started in 1883 with a group of women who identified during the Industrial Revolution that some folks were going to head downtown into the factories, but that left children needing care during the day. And so a group of women got together and said, we're going to go to the factory, we're going to stay with the kids. And fast forward to 2024, we're kind of doing the same thing. We are a majority, our agency has a majority number of women, and we care for children and families. Similar to what Cindy mentioned, we started as a care agency for children. So childcare, the city's first kindergarten, really focused on early learning and support services for our youngest staff members. You're right, Ruth, we used to be called Springfield Day Nursery. That's who we were. Fast forward to where we are now, we changed our name to Square One because in a very similar way to Cape Cod, we recognized that we were spending 10 hours a day with children, but we weren't spending as much time with their families. And so there wasn't much hope for long-term success because we were segregating the community and only serving children. So very similar, added an entire core of family support services. And we have 4 different home visiting models here at Square One, First Steps being one of them. So we're quite proud of the work that we've done 140 years ago, and certainly have great pride in the work we do today. I will say that when your predominant participant is the average age of 3, you learn a lot about how to create a culture of welcoming and connection and belonging. 3-year-olds are fearless and filterless, and they love with great hope. And they believe in all of their peers. They believe in the best of us. And so we try to model some of that positive energy that our youngest participants bring us. And so here at Square One, we have this strong sense of connection and belonging. And we truly believe that every person brings dignity to this work. And I think, again, we mentioned earlier, it's easy to say those words, but I do believe that every single person that works here at Square One also models that behavior. So, you know, we actually behave in a way that shows you that we truly believe in the words that we have on paper. I think the way that we're trying to create sort of a new chapter for Square One is by integrating a lot of the work we're doing with children and the work we're doing with families. I think as we brought on family services, we, out of necessity, almost developed two silos where we had a family services division and an early learning division. And lately, what we've really been focused on is how do we bring everyone together, creating the individual space we need for folks, but having an awareness and a connection to what the bigger picture is, that bigger community. And so that's sort of been my claim is, as a newer CEO here at Square One, I really want to create those connections. I'm also a big fan of clear direction. I think when people understand the big picture and what is the mission of our agency, where are we all going, but almost just as importantly, what's my individual role in this? So when people understand the expectations for coming into the space, but at the same time also being really aware that there are support services available when that isn't going great. We were really starting to focus on trauma-informed services for children. And we had this fantastic therapist. She sounds a lot like you, Rita. And she said, I'm getting increasingly uncomfortable with the way we pull people out for their special services. And even though it's supportive in nature and we're filling their bucket, it feels shameful. You know, it feels there's shame and less dignity about it. What if we embedded trauma-sensitive work into the classrooms and we just didn't pull people out? We just assume everybody has some experience of trauma because we can't do more harm by uplifting everyone. I thought, gosh, that's such a simple concept, but it makes sense. What if we did this for our entire agency? What if we welcomed people and rather than think, are you a person in recovery? Are you a peer leader? Are you this? What if we just developed a place where if you walk in the door at Square One, we welcome you? Just that simple. You belong here. And we start to reduce the harm that marginalized people feel. And we replace that shame and isolation and actually start to heal wounds by saying to folks, we're here to figure this out. And I think the folks that are on this webinar from Square One, I think I'm reflecting the truth, which is even when it comes to applying for things or a Corey check, to your point, Rita, it's easy to say, if something comes up, come and talk to me about it. Those are easy words to utter. You can even have a policy where here are the steps that we take to address those challenges, but you have to mean it. When someone says, you know, when HR says to an applicant, something came up, but our CEO truly believes that there's dignity and value to all individuals, go meet with her. Like, let's not go through 3 or 4 people and have you, you know, tell your story over and over again. Go right to the person that can help you problem solve this. And I think Shalonda said open door. We have an open door policy for all of our management team. It's just not me. And I believe in the value of all individuals. And so when folks come to me and say, what should I do? My big rule is do not ignore. If you get one of those scary emails saying there's a discretionary mark on your record, don't ignore it. Come talk to us and we're going to make this work. But you have to be able to communicate that and you have to believe it. Because as I mentioned to our panelists before, those 3-year-olds are good little gauges of truth. You can say something and they will be the first ones to say to you, are you lying? I think you're lying. You don't look like you really believe me. And so I think as adults, if we accept what a 3-year-old would expect of us, which is kindness, a compassion, but also a sense of connection and belonging that they give so freely, that if we just embody that in every moment of the day, then not only is our community a better place, but our greatest assets of an agency, which are our staff. I mean, I have some beautiful buildings and some less than desirable vans, But again, all assets on my balance sheet, the most valuable asset are the people that work here. And so you can't put a price tag on that. And so to me, with great pride, again, I hope that I'm representing my Square One folks on this call. But I think it's really important for us to know where we're going. I think it's important, again, if you don't know what your role is, find someone to help you problem solve that. Because we need everyone to be contributing to where we're going. And it doesn't mean everyone does the same. It doesn't mean everybody logs the same exact documentation or hours. However, they understand where their work fits into the puzzle of Square One's representation of the community. And so I hope that I've added value. I know that I know we work really hard to reduce harm, but I love when someone comes and tells me, we've gone beyond that at Square One. This agency has started to heal some really deep wounds that I have. And so it's in that healing part that I think as a community, we can really grow. Did I talk for 10 minutes?
You did great, Don. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate everything you had to say. And I can say, as someone who started my career at Square One 15 years ago, that everything that you said is true. And Square One is just really an amazing agency to wrap around their employees and their community. And I wouldn't be here today doing what I do if it wasn't for my start at Square One. So I just really appreciate your dedication to the work that you do. Thank you. All right. And now I'm going to turn it over to Deborah, who's going to talk a little bit about kind of equity within agencies and compensation, and really the importance of supporting these unique roles and positions within organizations.
Ruth, do you want to, I see Ruth's hand up. Do you
Oh.
want to say something?
Yeah, I do. I can't help myself, but I do have to just say that back in the 1990s, I think it was about 1993, Springfield Day Nursery provided childcare for a day treatment program that I ran in Springfield for women who came in every day of the week. And so they brought their children, and Springfield Day had a room in the program and did childcare right on site. And so I have very, very fond memories of working so collaboratively with now Square One, and it is very true that your organization has been dedicated to really serving the needs of all kinds of families over the years. So I just wanted to add that. Thanks.
Thanks, Ruth. Boy, wow. What am I following here? And I'm not going to take 10 minutes. I know y'all, I do like to talk, but because I think one of the things that makes this program so strong is how much we hear from the people who work in the program. And because this is a recorded webinar for other agencies that might be interested in doing this work, I actually really want to make sure that we open up not just for questions, but for people to talk about what they feel like organizationally has helped support them. Because when we've done site visits, it's been something that the training and TA team and myself have really talked about is different cultures and different organizations and the strengths and things that can be improved on. And one of the things that I've thought a lot about is that this program is, we still have the same sites that we started out with one exception, which is now not going to be continuing. But the agencies that we're working with philosophically were very aligned with what I was hoping for with this project, but they've also grown in that, and we as a program have adjusted to what the agencies brought. I think from a whole program perspective, that is really being strengths based, which is how do you let people and let agencies kind of do what they need to do in the best way that they can. And so sometimes, I'm often asked, well, what are the core positions that every site has? Well, what is first steps? What does everybody have to do? And most of the time I say, this is about a philosophical approach to how we work with people. It is less about the components of the service and more about how we think about helping to support people to live the fullest lives that they can as parents and as people in recovery. And I always say, this work is not for everybody and that we need to really honor that. Sometimes staff come and they're like, yeah, no, this is not the right thing for me. But I also have to say that I don't think this is the right work for all agencies. And I really appreciated what Cindy said about thinking about, especially human service agencies and at the state, we have the same problem. It's always like, how do we bring more money in or how do we bring more people in? And so sometimes we are responding to the funding that's available rather than really saying this is something that's very consistent with what we know is a need and what we feel like we have the heart to undertake, and the commitment. And I was really struck recently. I've said this a couple times, but looking around the directors and one who came 3 years ago, but the rest of them, everybody's been there since the beginning. I think it's very unusual. Um, so I do a lot of thinking about like how do we bring new agencies into this work and how to convey what it takes to host and support this program well. So it's not just about what's in your contract. Sometimes people are like, well, what are the contract conditions? And I feel like this isn't really about the contract conditions. This is really about how do we partner together on this initiative and really think about what will it take to show up in this really trauma informed and healing oriented way for families. When we say nobody's getting rich doing this work, I mean, it's just a gross understatement. None of us are compensated adequately. And we live in a country that really values different types of work more than others. And I'm just stunned sometimes when I realize that, that somebody's making in 30 seconds what I might be making in a year. Like that is, we live in a very income inequitable society, and being a professional helper, especially for families, is not valued in the way that it needs to be. And this creates pressures both for employers and for employees. And so I'm going to talk a little about compensation, which is stressful because for employees, for people working in the program or for people who might, come to this webinar later, there's like, what are other people making? Am I making more or less? We don't really have transparency. Should I stay or go? I hear that agency is actually paying more. And for employers, it can be, we're doing our best. There's so many factors to consider. We want to pay people well. We want to be fair, but we have many competing demands. And so, one can come at it and say, oh, well, you should just be paying more, but it's like, yeah, there are a whole bunch of other issues there. So we're going to talk more about hiring in the next webinar, but I think Dawn, in reference to somebody that she was working with, this was so perfect. The not causing anyone harm by uplifting everybody. Like, isn't that an amazing concept? And what I had written in my notes was designing from the margins. And it's the same idea. It's like the things that we would talk about and the things that are in our guide about how to make a supportive environment for people, how to help people feel safe and heard and respected in their work are the things that work for all employees. And that's something really important for us to remember, that it's not just, oh, we might have people in recovery and so we need to kind of coddle them because they're like fragile and they need to be able to like attend to their recovery needs during work. Well, how about like, boy, if all of us could take like a meditation break for 15 minutes, or we had a nap room in our place, and everybody like could sign up, like I'm taking a nap from 1 to 1:15 and whatever that looks like everybody needs that in their workplace. So there's equality and there's equity. And I say in this program, like I'm not asking employers to be equal because different programs have different resources available and they have different demands. And equity is really, how do we give people what they need for the job that they're doing and to do the job that they need to do? And so there are a lot of different components about this. There's compensation. Cindy referenced hours, having a shorter work week. In our program, we have smaller caseloads than for a lot of other programs in an agency. And sometimes people say to me, like, you're serving, like people have like 8 people on a caseload or 10 people. Like, look, that program has 25 or 50. I'm like, yeah, how long do your employees stay in the job who have a 50-person caseload, and how well are those people being served? And this is the dream world, right? Like, we're grant funded. It doesn't always look like this, but I think it's important to hold out what the ideal is and to keep pushing our systems to reach what we know is the right thing to do. Um, so there's this idea of salary compression, and salary compression is basically not distinguishing between the different things, the different components of somebody's role. So like everybody, so I'll give my example at DPH. Like we're basically all program coordinator threes. We could be, we could be 1 year into the job, we could be 30 years into the job. We're kind of all doing the same thing. And because we're in that, there's salary compression. And so that happens at agencies where it's like we have a category of home visitors, let's say, we have a category of recovery coaches, and then everybody has to be compensated adequately within that. And I have worked really hard with agencies, and I've been thrilled to see the way that salaries have changed over the last 5 years, in really trying to look at what are the components of the roles that people are doing, and how do they differ from what similar roles might be at an agency. So we're trying to not just look at the title, but we're trying to look at what is somebody doing. And also from an equity perspective, how do we move away from educational requirements? You will never see my degrees at the end of my name, because that is not what brings me the knowledge that I have to do the work I do. It's because I've been doing the work. It's because I've lived the things that I've lived. And I believe that equally, whether we're compensating a clinician or we're compensating a director or we're compensating somebody who's there in a peer role. And our peer roles have very different educational backgrounds, but there's really a movement in recognition now that there's so many life things that affect people's ability to access any kind of education, whether it's finishing high school, getting their high set, going on to higher education. There are things that happen in people's lives. There's access to financial resources, and that even at the state, I'll say they are now changing. We just got basically a thing put out saying like we're no longer wanting people to consider educational background for somebody's preparation for a job. It's pretty radical and incredibly important. And so I say that because somebody who's in a clinical role has invested a lot of finances, obviously, in their degree, but also are we valuing that work? Are we ascribing a different value to that work inherently in some way? And how do we ask ourselves, why we're doing that? Another thing about doing this work is that I feel like it's very important for agencies and for our systems as a whole and our financing mechanisms to really think about ways that we might be taking advantage of people who are in recovery because they want to do service as part of their recovery. They want to derive meaning. I'll say whatever, want to derive meaning from the difficult things that have happened in our lives, and therefore wanting to do work that is giving back to others. And yet, in that giving back to others, it leaves us vulnerable to being compensated inadequately, because there's a leverage point. It's like we know that you really want to be doing this, and maybe we can put. And I'm not saying that there's any maliciousness in this at all. This goes so far above all of us. But I do think it's an element that we have to think really carefully in terms of in terms of thinking about particularly hiring people with lived experience. Um, okay. So one of the things to be, for agencies to be looking at and is in thinking about hosting is what's the competition? What are other people paying? Realistically, we are in a very competitive work environment, and we have whole programs closing at agencies because they can't staff them. What else can your agency offer besides salary? And I think Cindy spoke to this particularly. And one of the things that I will say, because for First Steps Together, this is a very real thing. Medical settings always pay more. If any of you are feeling like you can't get what you need, go to a medical setting. They're always going to pay more. There's also going to be a lot of drawbacks to working in a medical setting. But just to be aware of kind of what other agencies are hiring, the kinds of people that we're hiring. And if we can't match compensation, how do we match other things to have the kind of work environment that people want to stay in? So one of the things that I did in this program a number of times is that I worked with agencies. I provided de-identified hourly rates. And, for some people that feels like a little controversial. It was never by agency. And agencies will also pay differently according to the geographic area they're in, according to the cost of living that they're in, whether it's the general pay scale is more suppressed because it's an early education and care agency. There's like a whole range of factors. So it's not about equality. It's really about equity, but we don't have a lot of transparency around income. you know? And so by doing that and by really helping people working in the programs and agencies to look at how the roles differ. So what is a home visitor? And what is a recovery coach? Because those are the two ones that we're most commonly compared to. And then for clinicians, now we're asking our staff to do things that all clinicians would ideally do, but many don't. So there's a lot of collateral contacts, there's a lot of additional training, there's being available to other staff as well as to families, there's home based work. For our peer staff and for our other staff, this project in particular, we hold a lot of responsibility. I can't say this enough. We're talking about generational well being for young children. We're talking about safety issues of remaining in the home, leaving the home, returning to the home. We have had many people who've lost their lives in this program. We have a lot of trauma that staff experience. These are things that are different from many other jobs that people have. And that has to be factored into, again, into equity. Um, so, a couple other things. So, one of the things I know agencies struggle with sometimes is what about when the funding runs out and we can't sustain the salary? And so, what I would say about that is when there is money, do the right thing. Some of that's figuring it out later. And there's also kind of had a balance, and I think this is true of the fiscal cliff for people, also for agency leadership around how not to be too paternalistic or maternalistic. I'm going to wrap up here, um, which is uh, sometimes when people get paid more, they lose their benefits. We know that a lot of our staff, are reliant. On benefits that family frankly everybody should have, right? There's no shame in it. Like everybody needs to have access to affordable health care and childcare and housing. But sometimes when people make more money, it puts them over the edge. Sometimes the agency leadership might say, like, that's not fair to put somebody in that position. I believe that that's actually a conversation to have with staff, like a very open conversation. What do these numbers look like? What does it take to have you? And often HR, like this is not part of the HR process. I think it's part of the agency preparation process. I want to give people a chance to talk. So I have some other thoughts, um, but I will say that in our program, particularly our peer staff, salaries mostly have gone up at least 50%, in some cases doubled. Like this has been a really huge change over 5 years. And I feel like we're leading you know, we can't be paying Dunkin' Donuts salary and expecting people to do this work. And so I think I really want to applaud the agencies that we're working with that have worked very hard to deal with the fact that people are looking and people are talking. Hey, he's making, a lot more than I am. Like, what's going on here? Like that happens in agencies. Yeah, I have more, but I want to give some time to talk. So hopefully there were some parts of that that would be helpful to agencies coming up.
Thank you, Deborah. I think you bring up a really valid and important point, and I appreciate everything that you shared. So we wanted to give it a little time to open it up to the audience to ask any questions you may have of these organizational leaders and amazing people here on the panel. You can feel free to unmute or put questions in the chat.
I have a question. Maybe this is for Deborah. So have you actually approached organizations about this issue of payment? And if so, how do they generally react? I can't hear you, Deborah.
Was that Colleen? That sounds like maybe
That's me.
Colleen. Yeah.
That's
Hi.
me.
Yeah. So, I mean, people here, we have representatives of 3 agencies. I mean, they have all consistently worked on compensation during our time together. Um, so that's a yes. Sometimes it's been through project directors, sometimes it's been directly with agencies. And it's again, like we do not set salaries at DPH. We're not allowed to do that contractually. So what we can do, as much as I'm able to provide support to the agencies fiscally, but when I can't do that, to just to help people think through how to advocate. And generally, I have to say, like, the agencies that we're working with are very thoughtful about balancing the needs of all of their employees and all of the pressures that they have. And maybe Dawn or Cindy or Rita would like to address that.
I was just gonna, thank you, Deborah, for calling me in. I think especially as an agency that operates and employs people working in different home visiting programs, it really resonates with me when you say things aren't all the same. And so again, I go back to, you know, as an agency, we have a mission. Our mission is centered on the well-being of children. With that comes all of their caregivers in their communities. So it's really a mission to create a good environment for all. But the work is different. And that goes back to my point of we have to be clear in both our expectations and in the truth of what our different job descriptions look like. And I have had conversations with other home visitors to say, all home visiting is not the same. We have different caseloads. We have different case weights. And in this program in particular, we have staff who are caring both for themselves in their own recovery, caring for their own children, and caring for people that are in some really challenging situations where they're dealing with their own recovery, but they have children under the age of 5. And so the work isn't necessarily, one isn't harder than the other, one isn't valued more than the other. But I think when you're asking people to employ parts of themselves as part of their job, there is a differential when it comes to a dollar value that you have to place. All of us employ ourselves in our work, but we have to be honest and truthful. And I think if we say everybody's doing the same work and everybody should be paid the same, it's not realistic. It's not the truth, and people know you're lying. So be honest. And then support people to make choices. I've said that to people more than once. If this does not meet your needs, if Square One is not a place where you feel supported and you can do your best work, I'm not saying go look for the door. I will help you find another place if you can go try it out, because our community needs folks everywhere, not just at Square One. And so you were spot on, Deborah. It's about equity and understanding to us at Square One, I think. So
just jump along with what you're saying, Dawn, and really echo that. I think for us, one of the greatest gifts, and this will sound ironic, was the pandemic, because it really showcased how different similar roles can look. And how operationally we need to approach things. And so that really sort of forced our hand to have the transparent conversations around, on paper, it may look the same. However, there's a lot of other things that are going on and embedded in this role that maybe you didn't know about, but let me share that with you so that you have a better understanding of what that is. And ultimately, it's about doing right by each individual staff member. As much as at times I would love for it to be a cookie cutter, and if A, then B, that would make my life a lot easier sometimes, but that's not realistic, and that's certainly not doing right by our staff, and not recognizing the variability across who we are as humans and who we are in our role as humans. And so I think it really does need to be an ongoing conversation, and one that can't be rigid, and really needs to have the flexibility to change with time.
I think probably as a nonprofit, the biggest challenge for us has always been the early education sector, which is totally undervalued in the world. Forgive me, in this country. And so I would say that a great deal of the energy has always been working hard to create balance, and it's been really speaks to the role of advocacy. It's the only part of our organization that is tuition based, and you can't charge families what it costs to run it. So that requires a whole other level of agency leadership, and that's what fundraising looks like, and that's what that looks like, where it goes to support that.
Thank you. Any other questions? And if anybody wanted to like ask a question anonymously, you can always like message me. I think we're going to take the spotlight off to make it a little more conversational. So I think I'll ask of all of you, really, I think you spoke to, you know, the need for people to be able to take care of themselves, no matter what the role is. But you know, balancing that flexibility of being able to take care of your own needs and your own recovery with accountability and getting the work done. Like how do you balance that within your agencies?
If I can, you know, my theory has been, you know, family first. And if you're not meeting your own needs, you're not able to do this work. And so it became, to me, that's how we function. And, you know, when I get a call, it says, you know, my child needs this today. That's where you belong. And if we're not modeling that, we always figure it out as an organization. We always figure it out. But if we don't practice that, then we're failing.
Thank you, Cindy. I really appreciate that. So we have about 2 minutes left. So really, you know, here are some of our key takeaways. You can find those in the guide. We can just keep moving here. Our next webinar next month is still in the Building the Foundation section, and it's chapter 1.3 on recruiting, hiring, and training. And we're really going to take a focus on how we approach hiring and different characteristics and competencies it takes to do this work. Really with relationships being the catalyst to change and central to all that we do. And for ongoing support, you can get more information about our program and access our library of resources at www.firststepstogetherma.org. The TA team also holds office hours every Friday. Anyone is free to join. This is around the family portfolio. You can ask any questions that you may have during this time. And if you have any questions, you can email me directly. And my email address is here. And thank you for joining us. So Nahia is going to put a survey in the chat. We would ask that if you could please take a couple minutes that it'll take to fill that out so that we can continue to better what we do. And if there's any questions and comments, we'll be happy to answer those. And thank you all for being here. Thank you all to our panelists for today. It was so amazing to have you here and sharing the incredible work that you're doing and how you support not only this program, but other programs like it that are really impacting your communities and holding families and children in mind. Really appreciate everything that you do and are grateful for the opportunity to work with you all.